Hello everyone, I'm JJ Dixon. We are in the very last week of Black History Month, and I hope that you have enjoyed the series. These last couple of episodes are going to be very special. Today I am with someone who is so near and dear to me and to the Brotherhood. If you've been following the series, you know that the members of the Brotherhood are either retired or active law enforcement officers here in the city of Jacksonville, Florida, but we do have two individuals who are non-law enforcement officers who we have given the opportunity to accept to be a part of our organization. And so back in 2015, Pastor John Allen Newman was bestowed the honor of being an honorary member of the Brotherhood, and he graciously accepted. And so we would not let this series end without speaking with Pastor Newman. I have to mention that the only other member that we have that's non-law enforcement is Bishop Rudolph McKissick Sr., who is unable to be with us today. But Bishop Sr., wherever you are, we love you, and we thank you for your service to the city and your support of the Brotherhood. So with all that being said, I know sometimes I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to let Pastor Newman tell you who he is, where he came from, and then let's find that out first. Who you are and where you came from.
Well, first of all, JJ, thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thank you for coming.
This is a real honor and a privilege to do this.
Yeah, thank you.
During Black History Celebration Month. I come from a small bedroom community outside of Philadelphia, in fact.
Philadelphia.
It's 0.8 of a mile from West Philadelphia.
Okay.
And it's called Lansdowne. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a tale of two cities. You know, African-American communities are often on the other side of the railroad tracks. Yep. And so that's what separated, for the most part, the black from white community when I grew up, because I was born in 1955.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So...
you saw it.
Yeah, saw it. And so... That's rain, huh?
Oh, it started raining. Well, we just have to speak a little louder.
I guess we will. And so, when I was growing up, we had integrated schools, but I didn't realize that we were getting over the desegregation or the separation of races or ethnic groups, shall I say, because I was bused when I
was going to say, I hate to interrupt, and I know this is your introduction, but when certain things spark me, I have to ask questions. When you say you didn't realize it, were you not old enough, or was it the area that you lived in?
No, what it was is that I didn't really understand that even though I was born, you know, right outside of Philly, that there was so much separation. So in my 6th grade, I was bused to another school in a community that is now, believe it or not, all African American. Wow. Right. Things change over time.
Yeah, they do.
So I was born and raised in Lansdowne, went to public schools there, and then graduated from what is called Lansdowne Alden High School, which is now Penwood East. Okay. Which consists of, oh my goodness, several school districts melded into one. And then I went on to college at Eastern Baptist College, which is now Eastern University, and got my bachelor's degree in religion, and I minored in sociology and psychology. Wow. And then when I was a senior in college, I was called to pastor my first church.
Wow.
Yes.
You've been pastoring for a long time.
Yes, at 21.
My goodness.
I started pastoring at Taylor Memorial Baptist Church in Philadelphia on Germantown Avenue. Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. This is my second church. So in 1983, I was made aware through a Jacksonvillian, Jacob Chapman, that Mount Calvary was looking for a pastor. And interestingly enough, the joint Thanksgiving service that used to have,
that we have,
Emmanuel and Mount Calvary, Dr. Wynn was ill. And Dr. Badger played a role, who was the former pastor, of course, of long-standing at
all those
Emmanuel.
Names are bringing back memories.
Yeah. He, I won't say manipulated things, but he was able to see to it that when it was Mount Calvary's turn, which it was, for the pastor to preach, and Mount Calvary didn't have a pastor, that I preached for that Thanksgiving service. And I stayed that weekend, and I came to an evening worship that Sunday here at Mount Calvary. And then on that Monday, after Mount Calvary had to go somewhere. I can't remember where it was. And I believe I stayed and I was the guest preacher for that anniversary we were going to. And so that was I think it was the 4th Sunday in November.
That was all it took, huh?
In 1982. And by, let's see, Mount Calvary voted in January, I think the last Sunday in January, and first Sunday in April 1983.
That happened fast.
I took over being pastor here at Mount Calvary. But one of the things that formulated my social justice mindset was when I was in college at Eastern. A very famous professor who actually was Bill Clinton's advisor during the whole Lewinsky, actually Clinton scandal, not Lewinsky scandal. She was the victim. But Dr. Tony Campolo, a sociology professor, he literally revolutionized my life and showed me the gospel being, about the person as well as the spiritual side in terms of the soul, that all of us is soul.
I have, just for context, I'm a member here at Mount Calvary, and I have heard you speak a lot, and you speak about that particular professor a lot in your, the delivery of the message to your parishioners. You speak about him a lot. So, and I didn't know, I just thought he was some famous random person that you read about. I didn't realize that he was your professor. So it's just interesting to know what a profound impact he had on your life, probably personally.
Oh yeah, he just passed away at the end of last year.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
wow, interesting. So when you came to Jacksonville, I want to know, when you were doing all that preaching from service to service to service, and they were trying to get you here, were you aware of the cultural difference between the North and the South?
No more than what my mother, who was from West Virginia, familiarized me with as I was growing up. And she would talk about, believe it or not, my mother would talk about the history of lynchings. She would talk about actually the closeness of the African American and Jewish communities who were both oppressed, particularly during the Depression. Because my mother was born, I had very old parents. My mother was born in 1914. My father was born in 1902.
So they definitely saw and witnessed some things, experienced some things.
My mother's grandmother was born in slavery.
Oh my gosh.
So slavery for my family only goes back 4 or 5 generations at the most.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to say that some of what we're doing is not being well received by some people because they think that we are very far removed from those times. And I wanted to point out that we're really not that far removed. There are people still living who were either told about actual events or who may have possibly experienced actual events. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. My mother very, very cogently would remind me of the things that she went through. And I didn't experience an awful lot of it, because I was younger.
Right.
But I do remember on one trip when I was traveling to Jacksonville, North Carolina, where my sister Frances, who passed away a couple of years ago, her husband was a Marine, and we stayed at Camp Lejeune. And we would periodically take trips down there, and I never will forget this one time my father had stopped for gas, and we wanted to get something to eat. And the only way my father could get food was not to go into the gas station, but there was a window on the side for black folk. And so that's how he was able to get food. And I never forgot that. I remember that like I can still see the gas station in my mind.
Interesting. And I'm so glad that you're sharing that, because it lends to what we know and believe, is that there are people who do still remember that. And so that's one reason why it's important for us to do this. So when you got here in Jacksonville and you started, I guess, kind of making your way around, at what point did you realize that something was off?
I'll tell you when I really recognized that there was something wrong. I came from a city that mirrored Jacksonville in terms of demographic percentages. Philadelphia had a little less than 30% African Americans. Jacksonville had, I think, like mid-20s, maybe a little less than that. African-American population, but it was Dickensian. It was the tale of two cities. We had in Philadelphia an African-American police chief, superintendent of schools, president of the city council, fire chief, all African-American. My dear friend who was in Congress, Bill Gray, who went on, excuse me, to head the United Negro College Fund. He was the first African-American to be chair of the Budget Committee when he was in Congress. I worked on his campaign, as well as the first African-American mayor, Wilson Good, before I left. That was the last thing I did before I came down here to Jacksonville politically. And I recognized that the paradigm we had there was, when you're in a minority, you have to have coalition.
That's right.
To get things done. You can't do it on your own.
That's right.
And sometimes, even in coalition, you have to swallow some things you don't want to do for a greater goal that may present itself later. That's how you get it done.
That's right.
And so we would meet, with some of our city council folks in Philadelphia, and they would say, look, this is a bill, I got to vote for it. I don't want to vote for it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they would say, I can't speak against it, but we need you to do it.
Right.
And so, we as ministers would do it.
Get up and do it.
And I was the communications director for Black Clergy of Philadelphia Vicinity, which was a group, a social action or social justice group. And our fame was in 1981 during the school strike in Philadelphia. We got in one of the church buses that the pastor had, and we held up traffic in Philadelphia, and we got arrested.
I can believe that.
We got arrested. And we were known as the 24.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're joining the club. We just spoke with Nat Glover a few days ago. You're joining the Nat Glover Club. You all have records.
Yeah, got arrested for holding up traffic.
Good trouble.
One week later, our schools were opened. It was catalytic in that sense. But I got here and I said, you know what? Let me meet with, I think we have 4 city council. I think there's always been 4 city council persons, African Americans, since I've been here in Jacksonville. And I said, let me have a meeting with them to talk about how can we work together, and clergy, and just for strategic purposes, right? And so I asked for them to meet me at the Urban League building, and none of them showed up.
Oh my goodness.
They didn't show up. And so I never will forget, I was going into, remember when they had the State of the Black Community presented by, I believe, the Urban League. And so it was held at Edward Waters, at then college, now university.
Of course, it was open to the public.
Yep, exactly was. And so I'm walking in with a prominent, I don't want to call his name, a prominent African-American political leader.
Okay.
If I say whether he was Congress or State House or State Senate, you know exactly who it was. And so I said, why aren't there African-American Congress people? And I never will, I can see it like it was yesterday, JJ. He was opening the door, we were going in together into the building at EWC. And he laughed and said, they'll never let us have that.
Wow.
And that told me, the combination of folks not showing up, and then that conversation told me that there really was a difference in what was the art of the possible, that it was not really here. And so I don't want to get ahead of you, but
no, you're fine.
But I remember when Jim McMillan was running, and the Brotherhood was very divided, and because I became close to the Brotherhood members, and I said, "What are y'all?" Because I was getting calls from both sides. You know, well, we're not with McMillan, or we're with Russell, or whatever. And I said, "Well, guys, come on to the house." So I had him come to my house, and that was there. I believe that was Jerry Spates and maybe Joe Henry, I think probably. AR was there.
Oh, we know AR was going to be on the scene. Rogers.
There was one Anthony Rogers. He was there, and I cannot remember the other faces that were there, but it was probably 8 to 10 of them. And I said, guys, what's going on? And they were talking about, well, we can't come together on who we're going to support. I said, you don't really have a problem. Yeah. So what? I said, is there anything so egregious that you just can't support one of the candidates. Well, not really. It's just that, we just can't come together. I said, well, you divide and conquer. I said,
there you go.
I said, be in both camps, and whoever wins will make sure they advocate for those who lost.
There you go. That's smart.
And he went,
real smart.
Wow. I said, yeah. I said, you don't really have a fight. You just have a strategy.
Wow.
I said, so basically that's what you need to do. So they supported both, and McMillan won. And that was probably my first kind of semi-quasi-official kind of relationship with the Brotherhood, and it only really kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and that was one of my questions, was how did you establish this relationship with the Brotherhood? And so now that you've answered that question, people like George Marshall, of course Anthony Rogers when he was living, would all tell us how involved, and I know what I witnessed when I came on board, but how involved you were from way back when with not just the city of Jacksonville, but law enforcement in Jacksonville, realizing that was a really important piece to the puzzle of the African American community. And so I just wanted to let you know that historically, your name has always been called in terms of that.
And I mean to cut you off, but there was another thing too that really also was very instrumental. Reverend C.B. Daly from First Baptist Church of Oakland.
Out east,
right. He was the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance president. And I knew Dr. Daly from his son Jerry, because we went to seminary together. Jerry was a few years older than me. And when I would come down to Florida for the Progressive National Baptist Convention, either midwinter board meetings or whatever, on my way back to Philadelphia, I would stop at First Baptist and he would have me preach on that Sunday morning heading back. So that was my familiarity with Jacksonville. Yeah. And so when I got here, there was some unrest, and it was involving a white police officer, R.K. Johns, who shot a black motorcyclist. And so there was an uproar. And so there was a meeting with the IMA, excuse me. And so when we came out of that meeting, Pastor Daly asked me to be the one who represented what happened in the meeting in a press conference. And so from that, there was a lot of protests and just a lot of uproar in the city. Yeah. And eventually, and it got rough for a minute. I remember AR calling me saying, hey man, there's a lot of crazy talk down here in the building about what they want to do to y'all because of your protesting and all that. And so what really was catalytic was Sheriff Carson at one point said, look, we got to find some way to resolve this thing. And so what do we need to do? And never will forget this. It was held at Bethel, at Pastor McKissick Sr.'s office. But H.T. Rim, Dr. Daly, and myself, I'm trying to think, there was one more that was there. I'm trying to think who it was Rim, Daly, McKissick. Okay, that's McKissick and myself, the four of us. And Carson said, what can we do to get this thing, this blockade resolved? How can we resolve this? And I asked the question, and I'm not being self-serving, this is just what happened. I said, how many African Americans are in Jacksonville as a population? I think like 22%, maybe 23. I said, what's the percentage of African Americans in the police force? And it was much lower than that. I said, if you commit, and the other brethren agreed, if you commit to growing the force by doing whatever you need to do, because that's not our problem. Right. But grow the force to the number so it's commensurate to the citizenry, that would ameliorate the situation. Yeah. And that's what they did. Wow. And so as you know, and that may be a story you want to tell, is fine, because you made me cry when you did it. You really, really did. You really made me cry. But from that, they had something totally unable to be done today in this zeitgeist we're living through right now. They had an African-American only recruiting class for the academy. And they put George Marshall over it. I remember like it was yesterday. And that's how our numbers originally got bolstered and gave opportunity. And if you want to tell what you did to me, you can. That Sunday morning.
Well, we've mentioned this, this all black recruiting situation that happened here in the city. We've mentioned this with a couple of others that we interviewed, and I think Tony Davis might have been one of them. But there was a time when, it was in the mid-'80s, I think it was, when that needed to happen. And oftentimes you hear the outcome, but you don't hear the backstory. And so it's great to know that, well, I knew it all along, but it's great to be able to get it out there that because of that meeting, and let me just pause for a second to say this. In the African American community, we've always looked for our influential pastors to be our voice, to be the ones to go. Dale Carson was the sheriff. To be the ones, if something really needed to be said or done, that they would be the ones to go to the powers to be and speak on our behalf, and which is what you all did, and specifically your part in it. But because of that test, that all African American recruitment and the test that was given and the people that were hired, we have people that were hired then during that time that have retired as officers, as sergeants, as lieutenants, as commanders. Some are running other police agencies now as a result of what you did. And so that's why in 2015 the Brotherhood felt it necessary to honor and recognize you for that. And yeah, we did. We showed up at church that Sunday morning. I don't even think you knew.
I didn't.
He didn't know.
I did not know.
We showed up at church that Sunday morning in numbers, and at the end of the service, we presented him with a plaque and an honorary membership into the Brotherhood because we should have. We really should have. We really should have. What you all did, and specifically you, because we're talking about you right now, for African American policing in the city of Jacksonville and really in the state of Florida was unprecedented at that time. And some people are still angry because that was done now.
Yeah.
They're still angry because that was done now. And so, we had church this morning, this Sunday morning, obviously we're at church. At the end of your sermon this morning, it's fitting right now. And basically what you said was, I know this is hard to hear, and a lot of people don't want to hear it, but it's the truth, and it needs to be said. And so that's the truth, and that needed to be said. And I know that we don't have a lot of time this morning, but I do want to get to, I brought Sheriff Glover's book with me while we're on the subject of the trails that you blazed. And I know I'm doing a lot of talking. I'm going to let you talk in a second. But I want to read something from this book for those who, and I know probably 98% of, maybe 99% of Jacksonville is not aware of this unless you've read this book. So let me share this real quick. And this is a book that was written by Sheriff Nat Glover called Striving for Justice. And it starts on page 126. This is Sheriff Glover talking about his run for sheriff. And the title of the chapter is Running for Sheriff, I Wanted to See a Burning Bush. So he says, Pastor John Newman of Mount Calvary Baptist Church, a man of influence who served as a bridge between black and white communities, he recently had arrived in Jacksonville from Philadelphia, where black folks had gained some electoral footholds, having elected their first black mayor. Is that true?
Yes, looking good.
All right. So then I'm going to skip down, and he says, I just hope that the department would be blessed with another sheriff as fair and effective as Jim McMillan. If I were going to run, I would need a sign from God. I would need to see my own burning bush, and then I did. I'm going to skip down a little bit more. He says, coming to similar conclusions regarding local racial politics, McMillan endorsed W.C. Brown for sheriff. W.C. Brown was a white man. Asked by reporters on February 3rd, 1994, why he wasn't endorsing a black officer, he said, quote, whether or not our community has progressed enough to be able to elect a black, I don't know. I've heard you say that before, so you know that was true.
Yes.
And I'm going to skip over to page 127. Pastor Newman reached out to, well, there's another part that I'm missing where you come to him and tell him that he needs to run for sheriff. But Pastor Newman reached out to local attorney Steve Padgett a cornerstone of the white political establishment who nearly had been elected Florida's governor, and to Steve's brother, Gary Padgett, who had served as a prosecutor and with whom I had worked on cases in the past. Pastor Newman asked them if they could support a black candidate. And then he goes through how that happened. And then he says, speaking with Pastor Newman, Steve was more direct regarding his willingness to support a black candidate. Yes, he said, if it's the right one. And then they agreed that I could be the man, and Steve offered to run the campaign without charge if I chose to enter the race. So that is what former Sheriff Nat Glover, who served as the first African-American sheriff since, I think, 1888 in the city of Jacksonville, has to say about you and your contributions to our city. I think it needs to be said and it needs to be noted, because oftentimes we don't know, like I said, the backstory, and you don't get this type of recognition until you're gone.
Yeah.
So I think it was important. I wanted to share that with everybody. I think it was important. And I want to give you an opportunity to speak on why in this city, with all, by then you knew what you had stepped into by then. Absolutely. And as you said before, with all that other stuff that had happened in the 80s, you knew the challenges. You knew that you probably weren't well liked by the real establishment at that time. What would make you go to a black man and say he needed to run for sheriff?
Because I'd seen it where I was. I just brought a certain mindset that it was the art of the possible. And just a little bit more of the flesh on that bone in terms of the backstory. If you remember Willie Dennis at FAMCO.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we had, there's always been like a non-group in the majority community. But we had like a non-group in the black community too. And we had, some were politicians, some were business persons, and some were police. And so we would meet periodically with the mayor or whoever else we needed to meet with off the record to resolve issues. Right. Because it was important to do that. And so this one meeting we were coming to was on the heels of Jimmy Millen deciding that he's not going to run for re-election. And so it was Nat, it was Jerry Spates, it was Joe Henry. Those were the three African Americans from the sheriff's department that were there, along with the others. Bob Ingram, I remember him. Ronnie Ferguson, and some others. And Chester Akins, because that's going to come up again. So, interestingly enough, I got there a few minutes late, which sometimes anyway, got there a few minutes late.
It's a common theme this morning.
And so I said, we got to decide which one of the folks we want to support for sheriff. And I said, well, who? And they mentioned W.C. Brown, Harry Russell, and Joe Stelma. And so I just sat there for a while, and then I just, employed the Socratic method, started asking questions. To the three of them, I said, have any one of those who are running, have they more experience than any three of you? And they said, no.
Excuse me.
I said, okay. Are there any who are running who have more versatility in understanding all the aspects of the department interdepartmentally than you do? No. And then I said, and educationally, because I knew Nat had a master's degree, I said, are any of them on your level educationally? And the answer was no. No. And so I said, well, why are you not thinking about one of the three of you running for sheriff? And I said to them, and I remember like it was yesterday, some things you just don't forget. And I said, look, when I come here, I'm just John. I said, I'm going to be pastoral. I said, the three of you need to get together and pray about and talk about which one of you need to run for sheriff, and come back next week and tell us who it's going to be.
Think you were crazy?
Well,
did they accept it right away?
No, not really. I mean, it was like it had not really crossed their minds to think that it was, again, the art of the possible. And I don't blame them for that. It was just not something that was done. Right. There was a certain mindset here. And I don't mean to be pejorative when I say
no,
that.
if I could hold your thought, because I don't want you to forget it, but if I could just throw this in, that when you listen to Nat Glover's story, and you should have heard Joe Henry's story by now, unfortunately Spates is not with us, but his kids did come on and talk about him, you know where they came from. So in the South, and coming from where they come from, that was not probably anything that they ever thought they would be able to do.
And it makes perfect sense that they would not. They were limited by what they've been exposed to.
That's right.
And in their own way, they pushed against a lot of limitations. And so I said, so let us know next week which one it is. And so we came back the next week, and Nat said, we did talk, and guys think that I should be the one that does it. And I said to them then, I said, well, here's the important thing. It cannot be a black campaign. That's not going to work.
That's right.
I said, we're going to have to put someone out front who represents majority culture, has a lot of influence in the community. And so just interestingly, you just mentioned about McMillan's statement about not sure Jacksonville was ready for a black sheriff. The Florida Times Union was having a roundtable discussion about that statement. I was invited, Chester Aikens was invited, and Steve Padgett was invited, amongst some others of the university professor from a woman from the University of North Florida who was there. And so during the conversation at the TU, the question was raised as to whether that's legitimate, what McMillan said. And so Steve said, it doesn't matter. If qualifications are qualifications, then the best person should get the job. So after it was over, I grabbed Chester Aikens and said, Chet, come with me. And we walked around the corner, and I said, Steve, you really believe that the most qualified candidate can win? He said, yeah, absolutely. I said, I got one for you. He said, who? I said, Nat Glover. And so he goes, well, interesting. I said, no, not interesting. He has a master's degree. I said, so no one else does. So by default, he's most qualified. And he said, you know what, I'll talk to Gary about it. And so it was, and I'm not throwing shade.
No, we want to know.
It was not immediate.
Okay.
It took calls to, hey, you guys made a decision yet? Well, we're still thinking about it. In the meantime, I had gone to Wayne Hogan and said to Wayne, we have an opportunity. And Wayne and I joke about it now, but he said, John, I'm just not sure Jax is ready to do that. And Wayne is an advocate for African-American community. But again, he just was not certain that it was, and now he was not opposed. He just didn't know whether the timing was right. Because he was very supportive of the campaign. And in the meantime, I even had a conversation with Doug Milne, my dear friend, with Nat, about the possibilities of running for sheriff and things of that nature. But it was Steve and Gary that eventually I called one day and they said, we're going to do it. And the rest is history. That's how it happened.
I'm sure for them, because all of them, just for those that don't know, were white men, Caucasians. And I'm sure for them to step out like that, they had to, this couldn't fail. This could not fail. Glover would have to win. Otherwise, they would take 10 steps backwards where, they had made all this progress. So I'm sure for them, it took a lot of thought and probably prayers too that this was the right thing to do. But thank God that you, with your foresight, in that meeting that day, because I never knew about that meeting that day when they were trying to figure out who they were going to support, and ended up with you telling them that. But with all of that happened, it's almost like your mother birthed you, and so everything that you became and everything that you will do in life, it credits back to your mother, right? I probably should have said your father in this case. But because of that simple conversation that you had with them, everything in my mind, now you're not saying this, I'm saying this, everything that Nat Glover did as sheriff for the city of Jacksonville and everything that he did after that is sort of a credit to the father, because of you sparking that fire in him and saying, you know what, you can do this. You're more qualified than everyone else.
Absolutely.
You can do this.
Absolutely.
And so we owe you a debt of gratitude for that. And I know that you're not asking for that, but these are my words, that we have to recognize historically what happened, how it happened, and how we all benefited from what happened. So,
well, I've always believed in African American excellence. I've always believed that if you just give us opportunity,
that's it.
we don't need a favor, just opportunity.
That's it.
That we will excel beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. And I just believed, and by the grace of God, getting close to law enforcement, I just believed when I saw what was missing there, and so much in the community that was harmed. You know, Kelly, who was shot 30 times and declared it was justifiable. I haven't even got into the whole movement to sit down Judge John Santoro for the racist things that he said about black children. We were involved in that as well. But just always believed that Jacksonville didn't realize how great it was and how great it could be. And I just hope that I played a minute part in helping Jacksonville realize its potential.
You played a large part, because as former Sheriff Glover mentioned, he went on to run for mayor, although he was not elected. He didn't win that race.
That was the goal.
But
that was actually the goal.
Really?
Yes. I said, because they were on opposite sides of Bay Street. And I actually said, we'll take Bay Street on this side, and then in 8 years, we take the other side of Bay Street, and you'll be the first black mayor.
There you go.
We had that conversation.
Well, he admitted that it may have been a good thing that he didn't win, because that catapulted his tenure at Edward Waters College, which that's a whole nother situation.
He did wonders there.
He worked wonders. And we didn't mention when he was here, but Edward Waters College was the first college in the state of Florida that was created as an HBCU to educate free black men and their children. So for him to go from where he was at the sheriff's office to doing that was just amazing. But I said that to say that even though he didn't win mayor, it opened the door for others to say, well, maybe I could be the mayor of Jacksonville.
Absolutely.
And so we ended up with an African American male mayor, and females that have also run for mayor. So, I mean, it just can't be stated enough just taking the blinders off of people and letting people see that their potential and that we could do these things. No one's going to win every race, but get in the race.
That's right.
Get in the race.
That's exactly
right. I appreciate you for that. And I know we talked a lot about this, but I think it was important because it involved law enforcement here in Jacksonville. And those were the kinds of things that the Brotherhood was behind 100%, pushing those agendas. And we know that you got involved in all kinds of other internal stuff with the sheriff's office concerning fairness, equality, and and even now if we call you're willing to do that. So I want to thank you for that. Before we go though, I said earlier that I was here for the service, and it's so amazing because your sermon this morning kind of weaved its way through what we've been doing for Black History Month. And so you started out your sermon this morning by talking about this notion of colorblindness.
Yes.
And you spoke directly to me because I've always been one that said we should all just be colorblind. We don't even need to see color. But my mind was changed this morning with what you said. So I'm not going to ask you to preach your sermon, but can you basically just explain that real quick?
Sure. And let me begin by saying I understand the sentiment.
Right.
Because the sentiment is actually not a pejorative one.
Right.
It's basically, let's stop making color a barrier to acceptance.
Right.
That's what that really means. And so I understand that the values some people have about that are really wholesome in what they want the end game to be. But every culture has a dominant culture. Every culture does.
Yep.
In Europe, there are dominant cultures. In Asia, there are dominant cultures. In America, there's a dominant culture, and it's white culture. All right, and it was established, when they came over from the colonies to establish this country. And to make a long story short, when you have people of different ethnicities, because race is a sociological concept, not biological concept. So there's only one race, human, but there are multiplicity of ethnicities.
Right.
And when you have a dominant culture and you want people to be colorblind, you're actually by default asking them to be molded and absorbed into the dominant culture, and therefore no longer seen in their diversity. And the scriptures are totally antithetical to that, because in Revelation it says the dead, small and great, stand before God, and every nation, tongue and tribe and language will be present. So God asks us, in Him making us in His image, to see diversity.
See that.
And to be blind to it is totally antithetical to Scripture. And so that's the real danger. It happened to the first century church when Jesus came, that the dominant culture was Roman. And so the temptation was to be melded into the dominant culture by default, because it is so powerful. It sets the standards. And so that's something that even though the sentiment may be honorable, but in reality and practice, it's very harmful.
Yeah, and I get the sentiment, and I wish that were possible. I really do. I've always felt that way all my life, but now I have a better understanding for why it can be a dangerous thing. And so I just wanted you to share that with us. So in closing, I'm going to give you an opportunity just a second if you have anything that you want to say that we didn't cover this morning. But before I do that, in closing, I have to say that I know that you've always been, you talked about your father a lot, but you've always been very, very close to your mother.
Oh, yeah.
And so I had an opportunity to meet her before she passed away. And so I did want to call her name. Call her name.
Viola Maybell Allen Newman.
Viola Maybell Allen Newman.
And I called Mom Maybell. I always
You went all the way back there.
I called her Maybell. I always called her, hey Maybell, how you doing? Yeah.
Another mama's boy. We've had We've had 3 or 4 of them.
No doubt.
I'm catching this. I'm catching this.
Yeah.
But I did not want us to leave here without mentioning your mom, because I know how much honor and credit you give to her for becoming the man that you have become. So I wanted to do that. Your son Marcus, of course. Your grandfather.
Yes. Kate and Denise. Yes.
Oh my goodness, I'm still jealous. And then your lovely wife, Omarosa, who's
absolutely
not here with us today, but wherever you are, we love you, and we honor you as well.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to mention those.
Brilliant.
Oh yeah, she's definitely a brilliant young lady.
Yes,
she's definitely that.
She is that.
So we didn't want to miss out those individuals who are near and dear to you. But also, I just wanted to once again, on behalf of the Brotherhood, to thank you for all that you've done for African American law enforcement in our city, in our county, which is all incorporated, and really throughout the state. And a lot of those whose lives you've touched and changed have moved on to different cities and states, and they're able to do the work that they've done because of people like you. And I know you're gonna kill me for this, but I'm gonna lump Anthony Rogers in there with you because y'all were like the yin and the yang, you know.
Yeah.
You did it your way and he did it his way, but in the middle you all met, and it worked out for the good. So I just wanted to once again thank you for that. So if you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make today.
First of all, again, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm again humbled and honored and privileged to do so. I guess the only other thing I would say is that Jacksonville still has so much that's going for it, but it's going to take all of us. And it's going to take a persistence and consistency to keep pushing for justice. You know, Dr. King, who's the daughter of Bernice and I, we spent some time together some years ago when we actually traveled out of the country as a part of a group. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is slow, but it bends towards justice. And I would never disagree with Dr. King, but here's what I would say in terms of augmenting that statement. The arc of the moral universe is slow, but it is bent towards justice. Not that it bends, but it is bent.
It is bent.
It is bent as we become active to bend it.
Wow.
It doesn't bend on its own.
That's right.
It is bent by people being willing to make the sacrifices and to stand in the gap to bend it towards justice. And sometimes it costs lives. It costs Medgar Evers' life.
Yeah.
Goodwin, Swerney, and Cheney lost their lives. Dr. King lost his life. Malcolm X lost his life. Rodney Hurst was beat up axe handle Saturday. As it's bent towards justice. It will be bent, but it doesn't just bend on its own.
That's right.
It's bent when we get involved. So I hope that I've been able to play a part to bend it towards justice.
I love that. You absolutely have. And I'll just, in closing, follow up by saying, based on what you said, all of us, no matter how small we think we are, no matter how insignificant we think that our contributions might be, or how dumb our ideas may be, it takes all of us. So if you're not involved, get involved.
Absolutely.
Get involved.
Absolutely.
Get involved, because I think in your opening first few minutes, you made a statement about it taking all of us. We need to be a unified group.
Absolutely.
Unit. And so, yeah, no matter who you are, get involved, just like Pastor Newman did. Wasn't even from Jacksonville, Florida, came here, got involved, and changed the way that we did business here in Jacksonville concerning certain elected officials and positions, and encouraged and motivated so many people to step up and run. And so thank you so much again for all that you've done. The last thing I want to say is that distinction of honorary member is something that we do not take lightly. Obviously. This year we celebrate 45 years as an organization, and we've only done it twice.
Wow.
So congratulations.
Thank you, and I am honored, and it is a privilege to be a part of the Brotherhood.
All right, on that note, I think we will say goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.